Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Kansas City Royals. We are at the start of the 2032 playoffs. Royals held off the Chicago White Sox by one game to win the AL Central in this 2032 season. And we will be hosting the White Sox in the best of three wildcard series. So, we'll definitely get to decide on the field who the best team in the Central Division really was in this past season. Bit of a disappointing year for the Royals, 87-75 record, not exactly what we were looking for as we try to defend our World Series championship. But we're in the playoffs, and we've got home field advantage for the first round, so things could definitely be worse. We are waiting to hear about an injury from good reliever R.J. Dabovich. Obviously will not be optimal to lose him for the playoffs. Series against Chicago starts tomorrow, so hopefully we'll know what's up with Dabovich before we have to finalize the playoff roster. But that's going to be our focus right now, figuring out... we're going to move to a four-man pitching rotation, so it probably means Ricky Venasco is going to move into the bullpen. It'll be interesting to see if he moves into the closer role. Yeah, that would have been a little surprise. Venasco has been our closer in the past. You can see he had 39 saves in 2030 before he's moved back into the starting rotation each of the past 2 years. So he does have some experience, but Tyler Bosma is coming off a mixed season as a closer. The 46 saves is really good. The 82 strikeouts and 62 2/3 innings is good. The 2-8 record, the 4.02 ERA, not as good. Overall, 105 ERA plus, 111 FIP minus 0.2 WAR. Not a great year for Bosma, but hopefully he will be a successful pitcher for us in the playoffs. And Venasco will definitely bolster the bullpen as we move to a four-man rotation. But as I mentioned, we could be losing R.J. Dabovich, so that'll kind of weaken things there. I do think similar to what we did last season, we're probably going to just go with 12 pitchers on the playoff roster. We've typically split it on the 26-man roster during the regular season, 13 pitchers, 13 position players, given that in most playoff series, we've got the frequent off days. We actually don't have that in the potential three-game series against the White Sox, but feel that 12 pitchers should be more than enough to get us through back-to-back-to-back games. And that'll give us a little more flexibility with pinch hitters and defensive substitutes in the everyday players. We've got, as we talked about in our last episode, a lot of good young middle infielders coming up through the farm system, some of whom are on the major league roster right now, with the example being Willie Flores, and several of which are also in the mix to make the playoff roster, including Rich Alvarado, Aragetto Lazioli, and Tony Fonseca. Lazioli probably will not. He's been banged up with injuries a lot recently. Wrist tendonitis. He's going to finish this year. Number 88 prospect in baseball, and he did hit 309 in 421 at-bats in Omaha. Given the injury, unlikely to make the playoff roster, but certainly could see Alvarado or Fonseca potentially joining or maybe even replacing Willie Flores on the 26-man playoff roster as we make those decisions. And as we make the initial decisions on the playoff roster to get down to 12 pitchers, I think we're going to leave Mackenzie Gore off. Had a real rough year, 5.92 ERA. He only pitched 24 1/3 innings, kind of became a lefty specialist for us, but he's not particularly more effective against lefties than he is against righties. It's possible that he'll be added back to the roster if Dabovich's injury ends up being something that's going to sideline him. Other options to bring up would be Heisel Barrow, Jaden Woods, or Yeifer Perdomo, or the youngster Bob Williams. I do think I would go with Mackenzie Gore out of those four. So if we do need to move Dabovich off the roster, if we get a negative, unfavorable injury diagnosis, or if we get to tomorrow and the diagnosis is just pending, then I think that Mackenzie Gore will end up placed back on the playoff roster. Catchers are obviously Bolden and Murphy. Vasquez, Anderson, Guerrero, Witt Jr. obviously on the roster. Junior Marin, Brennan Davis, Angelo Velasquez, although he's been banged up, and Jacob Guerrero on the roster. So the question is what we do with the shortstops with Flores and Lopez, and then a backup outfielder with Nazir Muley, given that our center fielder Velasquez is banged up with that back tightness, but we're not going to want to not have him on the roster. Probably means Muley, who is acceptable, at least defensively in center field, is going to make the team, even though we don't love his bat. He did hit .257 this year with 5 homers and 183 runs batted in. Profiles as a very average-ish offensive type player at best. So not optimal if we have to be starting him in center field, but at least he can man the position defensively. I guess the other option would be having Tony Fonseca on the team. Youngster hit just 186 and 102 at-bats, but is a exceptional and exceptionally versatile defensive player. Plus infielder in terms of his defensive ratings, plus outfielder in terms of his defensive ratings. Could be a valuable guy as a defensive substitute to have on the 26-man playoff roster. And looking at what Byron Nichols intends to do right now, probably makes sense to keep up both the veteran Nicky Lopez, who he wants to start against right-handed pitching at shortstop, and the youngster Willie Flores, who he wants to start against left-handed pitching at shortstop. Flores did hit .316 and 38 at-bats after hitting .319 in Omaha. He only hit .241 in Double-A this year before we promoted him, but certainly proved more than capable at Omaha and at the major league level. You can see he's still got some work to do to improve his skills, particularly his contact and his avoiding strikeouts, but can handle the position defensively at this point if we need. So I think both of those guys are going to be on the roster. Cabrera is going to be our backup utility infielder. Did only hit .236 this year and 487 at-bats, but like his defensive versatility, and he's more of a proven major leaguer. As I said, I think I'm going to keep Muley up simply because he can play center field and hit a little bit if Angelo Velasquez ends up banged up. So then the question is just who to bring up as the final player on the roster. Juan Palomar, who hit .292 for us this year after hitting .309 in his first full season in the majors in 2031. Has been kind of a utility player for us. You can see 223 at-bats as a rookie, 332 this year, but is a 300 hitter at the major league level. So his bat is useful, potentially coming off the bench. Not much of a glove. Rich Alvarado, the youngster, also profiles as having a decent bat and did hit .323 in limited time with us this year. Good personality. And then Tony Fonseca, who we've talked about, doesn't have the bat of either of those other two players, but just love the defensive versatility from him, particularly in a playoff series. Don't think he would be starting any games for us after batting just 186, although with that glove, I actually think it's possible that Nichols would put him in the starting lineup. Let's just take a look. Yeah, Nichols makes Tony Fonseca the starter, which I don't know if I love. I mean, he is better defensively at shortstop, but he just hasn't hit it all at the major league level. Although if we did bring him up, then that would let us take either a Nicky Lopez or a Willie Flores off of the roster and bring on a bat who's a little bit better. But I am torn on this. I don't always, but I often tend to go defense. I just don't have a lot of confidence in Fonseca hitting at the major league level at this point. and I don't know that I want him to be starting every day in a playoff series. I think the guy has a big role in the future of the Royals with that defensive versatility, but I'd really kind of prefer for him to be a super sub defensive substitution who maybe starts 80 games a year at 4 or 5 different positions, puts together, 300 some odd at bats, probably plays in 140 games a year as a defensive substitute or a pinch hitter if we're really desperate. But I don't know that I want him starting at shortstop in a best of 3 playoff series. So still have some thoughts to do as to what this playoff roster should really look like. And as much as I love Fonseca's glove, and it could be real useful in the playoffs, I feel that with Flores, Cabrera, Nicky Lopez, Tim Anderson, and Bobby Witt Jr. even, we've got 5 more than capable gloves who can play second, third, and short for us. With Flores and Lopez platooning, I feel like we're good there. And it's just, I can't leave Juan Palomar off of the playoff roster. The guy's 25 years old, .299 career batting average at the major league level and 555 at-bats. Doesn't have a ton of power, admittedly, but I think he could potentially need to come through for us at some point with a big pinch hit, and I want to make sure that he is on the roster for us. I feel that we'll get good enough defense from the likes of Lopez and Flores at shortstop. Obviously, we'll get real good defense from Bobby Witt Jr. at third, and then we've got Tim Anderson at second, Ricardo Cabrera to back up those positions. Hopefully, Velasquez can go in center field if Muley needs to go. He's a better hitter at this point than Fonseca is, although he's not as good defensively. So we're giving up a little bit of defense, but I feel that we're adding a little offense to the team, and you can see Juan Palomares actually slots into the starting lineup as our starting first baseman, batting 9th against DHs, at least according to what Nichols thinks he's going to do right now. So interested in people's thoughts on it. Clearly Fonseca is better defensively than Lopez or Flores right now, but I think that both of those guys have better bats at this point and want to kind of get a balance at the position with a competent and I think in both cases above average defensive shortstop. Although they aren't as good as Fonseca, I think they'll provide a little more with the bat, and hopefully we'll be able to outslug the White Sox when that series gets going. And we've simmed ahead to the start of the series, so basically just simmed ahead a day. Wanted to find out what was going on with R.J. Dabovich's injury. And unfortunately, we still have not. The diagnosis is pending. So the question now is, do we keep him on the playoff roster or replace him with Mackenzie Gore? He's been hurt for 3 days now, and we still don't know what's going on with him. I tend to think that means it's probably a pretty significant injury. I'm going to hope that it's not that serious and keep him on the roster. Obviously, if it ends up being something that's going to keep him out for a couple of weeks, we can move him to the playoff IL. I think we can. And then bring up Mackenzie Gore. Actually, it's taken 3 days to diagnose. I think odds are it's probably something relatively serious. I'm actually going to move Dabovich off the roster for the first round. Bring Mackenzie Gore back up. Might not be the right decision, but do kind of feel that with Venasco, since we're going to a 4-man rotation, having Venasco in the bullpen definitely helps as a bridge to Bosma. And then, Yonadon and Sandy Gaston, who we made those trades for closer to the trade deadline, it's time for those guys to earn their money. So as we get ready for the Wild card series against the Chicago White Sox. Let's take a look at both teams. Obviously, we already talked about we ended up edging the White Sox by 1 game to win the AL Central, and we did have an 11-8 record against them this year. So hopefully that continues and we can win at least 2 out of 3 here, or win 2 out of 3 here. They were middling, 8th in the league in runs scored, 6th in runs against. Their offense was better than us, as we were 10th in the league in runs scored this year. Their pitching not quite as good as ours. We were 3rd in the AL in runs against. So although I've been talking about trying to outscore them with the way that I've constructed the lineup, maybe that's not the right approach. We talked about Ben Borgman. In our last episode, he had a really nice year for us, first full year with the team after we traded for him from Colorado last year. 15-6, 2.97 ERA, 3.5 WAR, 3rd in the league in wins, 3rd in the league in ERA, and he is going to be going against, for the White Sox, Daritson Feliz, 33-year-old, 5-2 record, started just 10 games after they apparently traded for him from Oakland right before the trade deadline. Was much more effective with the White Sox, 2.67 ERA after he came over, after having a 4.87 ERA with the Athletics. So game 1 of the 2032 Wild Card Series as the Kansas City Royals try to defend their World Series championship. And bad start to the series. 7-1 loss. Sandy Gaston is hurt. Still waiting to hear what's going on with RJ Dabovich. But rough game. Bobby Figueroa 3 for 4 with a couple of doubles. Scored 2 runs. Drove in 2 to help the White Sox. Feliz was solid in just 4 2/3 innings. Ben Borgman, probably his worst game of the season. After that really fine regular season, gave up 5 earned runs, didn't even get out of the first inning. After that, Tumis, Gaston, Hubbard, and Goebel, none of them allowed runs. Adon did give up 2 towards the end of the game, but not going to win a lot of games when you give up 5 runs in the first inning. And when you only get 5 hits, 2 of them by Brennan Davis, 2 of them by the shortstop Flores, and 1 by Jacob Guerrero. Going to be tough to win when you only have 5 hits and you give up 5 runs in the first inning. Sandy Gaston hurt. We'll sim ahead to tomorrow and see what the injury situation looks like. But backs are already up against the wall for the Royals here. We need to win 2 in a row to be able to move on to the ALDS. And RJ Dabovich is out for 2 months with that elbow strain, so glad that we did not try to put him on the playoff roster. His year is obviously over. Not optimal, but it is what it is at this point. More importantly, for the near term, let's take a look and see how Gaston is doing. Day-to-day with a sore ankle, minimal impact on his throwing. I think we just deal with it. Probably not even going to need him out of the bullpen if everything goes well. It's only a temporary injury, but we still got 11 arms in the bullpen. Garrett Crochet going for the White Sox, a 6-7 record with 10 saves. You can see he's been mix of a closer and a starter the last 2 years. 47 saves a year ago, 21 starts this year. 6-7, 4.03 ERA, but a SIERA of 2.56 indicates he's still a pretty effective left-handed pitcher. And we are going with Caleb Lagerwell, who won the clinching Game 7 of the World Series last year, pitching again with the backs against the wall for the Kansas City Royals in his first playoff appearance this year. 10-9 record. The win-loss record wasn't vintage Caleb Lagerwell, but the 3.46 ERA, the 1.10 WHIP, the 3.70 SIERA, the 3.5 WAR, all vintage Caleb Lagerwell. Mr. Consistency out of our rotation. As we've talked about in the past, he does have a player option for $18 million for next season. We expect that Lagerwell is going to opt out of that. So there is potential, even though we will try to bring him back if he does opt out. Might not have the money to do it, might be looking for too much. So there is potential that this is Caleb Lagerwell's last game in a Kansas City Royals uniform if we lose. So the hope is to get a good pitching performance out of Lagerwell and push things to a deciding Game 3 here against the White Sox. And we do get a 9-4 win. Goebel with the win in relief. Bobby Witt Jr. hit a home run. Crochet with the loss. Willie Flores continues to hit well at shortstop. 3 for 5 with a couple of runs scored, a couple of ribbies. 17 hits from the Royals today, so the offense definitely got on track. We did make 2 errors, not optimal. Goebel, the pitcher, and Velasquez, the center fielder. Lagerwell was fine. 2 runs over 4 1/3 innings. Didn't pitch long enough to get involved in the decision. Tumis, Goebel, clean relief from them. Gaston dealing with that injury. Did end up pitching. Ricky Venasco clean and Tyler Bosma clean in the 8th and 9th. So big game from Willie Flores, playing at shortstop again, and we're moving on to a deciding Game 3 against the White Sox today. Zach Jacobs on the mound for the Royals was 11-8 this year with a 3.75 earned run average, 3.3 WAR, 3.76 Sierra. So a good, solid year for Zach Jacobs, who has been a pretty solid pitcher for us. You can see a 108 ERA plus and a 93 FIP minus over the course of his major league career. A little better than that this past season. Hopefully we get a good performance out of him in the deciding Game 3 going against Angelo Bolden. Really nice year for the White Sox. Led the league in innings pitched, strikeouts, whip, strikeout to walk ratio, and pitcher WAR. 14-8 record with a 3.62 ERA but a 2.49 Sierra. You can see he is a perennial all-star and has also won a couple of Cy Young Awards. Looks like he could be in the mix for the Cy Young Award this year, too, with that 14-8 record, leading the league in strikeouts, second in innings, a second straight year. Led the league in pitcher WAR. So tough matchup for the White Sox, or actually a tough matchup for the Royals versus the White Sox, but we got a solid pitcher on the mound too. Hopefully we can get to Clint J and move on to the ALDS. But it was not to be. A 3-2 loss. Bosma, who we had been talking about all season long, not loving him as the closer, got the loss in relief. Brennan Davis did win the series MVP for us despite being on the losing team. It was 2-2 tie going into the 9th inning. We had come back in the 8th, tied the game up, and then brought our closer on, and Bosma proceeded to give it up. Disappointing. It's been a disappointing year for the Royals to finish 87-75. Obviously, would like to have lasted longer in the playoffs as we tried to defend our World Series title, but it is what it is. Offense was not great in 2 games with 5 hits in Game 1, just 6 hits in Game 2. Basically had a ton of offense there in the Game 2 win, but in Games 1 and 3 we didn't hit all that much. So it's a disappointing end to the season. Zach Jacobs was fine. Did give up 8 hits and a walk over 4 2/3, but only allowed 1 earned run. Gaston on in relief again, followed by Hubbard, Adone, and Venasco. And then Tyler Bosma ends up giving up the run in relief, and we were unable to come back, even though we had home field advantage. In last licks in the ninth, could not really get anything going. So, in the bottom of the ninth, it looks like Brennan Davis drew a walk on his way to trying to get the series victory for us, but then Velasquez hit into a double play. So the season is over for the Kansas City Royals. Did get back into the playoffs, did win the AL Central again, but failed in our effort to repeat as World Series champions. And given that we've been such a good team over the last few years, that's not going to make ownership happy. They want us to win the championship by next year, and they also want us to build a dynasty. So a first-round wild card exit in the playoffs is not exactly what owner Isaiah Moore is looking for from us. So with the season now in the books, we'll take a look and review the full scope of the 2032 season. As we talked about, we never had a losing record in any given month, but we only had 2 months, June and August, where we were more than one game above 500. We had 4 different months, September, July, May, and April, where the Royals were just a game over 500. So it was a middling kind of season. We just never could get any real momentum going with this team, and that ends up with an 87-75 record. As I talked about, we did win the division, but it just was not as dominant a season as we've kind of gotten used to. And you can kind of see that here. It is the second worst winning percentage that the Royals have had over the past 8 years, only 2029. Which is the one time in the past, I guess, 8 years at this point where we didn't make the playoffs, is the only year that we had a worse winning percentage than this year. So a bit of a down year for the Royals, but, I mean, to be fair, we've been pretty successful over the past decade. So obviously want to win it all every year, but it was not to be the case. As we talked about at the start of the White Sox playoff series, Royals offense not as good this year as it has been in previous years. 10th in the league in runs scored, which is pretty hard to do when you're first in batting average and third in on-base percentage, but not a great slugging team, not great in extra base hits, tied for last in the AL in home runs with 164. We did continue to steal a fair amount of bases, not strike out that much, but we also didn't walk that much. So when you add it all up, it was a pretty mediocre offense. The pitching remained a strength, 3rd in the league in runs allowed, 3rd in starter ERA, 9th in bullpen ERA, which is a big disappointment. Our bullpen has been real solid for really that whole of the whole of that past decade that we were just talking about. But we've definitely underinvested in it in recent years and kind of let a lot of important relievers move away and traded some away, let some move away as free agents. And the thought is that we can always find a reliever, as we did try to do with those trades for Adon and Gaston before the trade deadline this year. But maybe a spot that we need to pay a little more deliberate attention to this offseason to bolster that bullpen a little bit for next year. But it was a pretty solid pitching performance otherwise. You can see we're generally in the top 5, honestly the top 3 in the league in most of the pitching categories. So a good solid pitching year. And defensive efficiency, we're 5th. Zone rating, we were 3rd. So the defense still pretty solid also. Moving back to the everyday players, Bobby Witt Jr. should be an MVP candidate after putting up a 7 WAR this year, 297 batting average, 33 steals, 24 home runs. Just another solid vintage Bobby Witt Jr. season. The 141 OPS plus and 138 WRC plus are the best of his career. 32 years old now, and has been the cornerstone of this franchise since we started this playthrough. You can see he's likely to get over 2,000 hits by the 2034 season. 257 career home runs, should get to 1,000 ribbies if he's healthy this coming season. Has an outside chance of getting to 500 stolen bases. In a 280 career hitter with a 124 OPS plus, 122 WRC plus, and a 62.8 WAR over his career. So not necessarily a shoe-in lock first ballot type Hall of Famer, but certainly looks like if we get another 5 or 6 vintage Bobby Witt seasons out of him, that Bobby Witt Jr. could be Hall of Famer in this sim of OOTP 23. Kind of interesting. The 32 home runs that he hit as a rookie is the most that he's hit over the course of his career. 28, 27, and then the 24 that he had this year and back in 2028 were his other top home run season. So hasn't been an incredible home run hitter. Does have 361 doubles, though, and is just a incredibly consistent player for us on a daily basis. Jacob Guerrero, who we made the trade for right after Dylan Cruz suffered that season-ending injury, did everything that we would have hoped that Dylan Cruz was going to do for us. 38 homers, 105 runs batted in, 305 batting average, 5.3 WAR, 152 OPS plus. Just a brilliant year for him. He's going to be looking for big money this offseason, given that we should have Cruz coming back. I don't think there's any way we can possibly fit him in. Yeah, he's looking for $27.6 million, which is even more than Cruz is making. So he did everything we could have hoped. Alex Vasquez, the brilliant young first baseman / left fielder / DH. I guess it's an off year for him, but when an off year is a 282 batting average, 35 homers, 97 ribbies, leading the league in doubles for a third consecutive year, and still putting up a 144 OPS plus and a 4.3 WAR. When that's an off year, we'll take it. Now, he's going to start making big money next year, as he's now played 3 years at the major league minimum, expected to get about $10 million in arbitration. We've thought about trying to sign him to an extension. Every time we've talked about it with him, he's wanted a player opt-out before his free agent years. Looking at this now, he is willing to let us buy out a few free agency years before the player opt-out, so maybe something to think about, but not something that we're going to approach right now, simply because right now we don't have a ton of money available for extensions. And as we did talk about, we're waiting to hear whether Caleb Lagerwell is going to opt out of that contract, and then we'll have a big decision as to whether we can fit Lagerwell back in and want to bring him back and can fit him back in if he does opt out. We will free up a little bit of money. We'll talk about Nicky Lopez in his season shortly, but very unlikely that we're going to exercise that team option on him, given that we have the likes of Rich Alvarado, Willie Flores, Tony Fonseca, and Arrieta Lazioli, who can play middle infield for us going forward. So given Lopez's age, he's unlikely to be back, so that'll free up a little bit of money. And then we've got a team option on Mackenzie Gore also. As we talked about, he's coming off of kind of an off year. He's going to be 34 before the season starts. $2 million isn't a ton of money, but still a decision that we'll have to make when we get to the off season, which we're basically here at. Sean Murphy made the trade for him to bolster our defense at catcher. Was clearly just a 2-month rental, with the fact that we do have Angelo Bolden. Not going to be paying Murphy the kind of money that he is likely looking for. Yeah, $19 million for a 38-year-old catcher who doesn't hit that much. As good as he is defensively, that's a guy we'll move on from. Only hit .219 for us in 128 at-bats after we brought him over. Did put up a positive WAR of 0.8 with us, 4.2 for the year, driven by his excellent defensive ability, but he will not be back. Angelo Velasquez, the young center fielder, a little bit of a down year, I guess. He won the batting title for us in his first full year in the majors last season. Banged up with injuries this year. Did hit 300 over 414 at-bats. He is just an incredibly inefficient base stealer. You can see he's got great speed, but not really all that good at stealing or base running. And we've tried adjusting his strategy down to make him a little less frequent at stealing bases. I think we've got to kind of notch it down another notch because he is just not that good at it. 23 out of 40 this year, 33 out of 52 as a rookie. Just an incredibly inefficient base runner. Was a plus offensive player, put up a 2.6 WAR. Very good defensive center fielder. His range, 3.26, efficiency 1.050, 10.3 zone rating. So good defensively. And, if he's close to a league average hitter or a little bit above league average as a hitter, which he was this year, very happy to have him in the lineup every day with that great defensive range in center field. Angelo Bolden, who did lose some playing time at catcher once we brought Murphy on board, 288 batting average and 326 at-bats this year. I tend to think he's going to fall somewhere between the 85 OPS plus and the 78 WRC plus he put up as a rookie versus the 104 and 105 he put up this year. Looking at that batting profile, I think he kind of profiles as like a 95 to 100 kind of OPS plus, WRC plus kind of guy. So a close to average major league hitter with a good glove at catcher, good personality. Would be content with him as the starter, especially making low money. Obviously, if there's an ability to upgrade at catcher, we would go for it, but certainly not the most glaring need we're going to have this offseason. Brennan Davis is a guy we signed to a minor league contract with major league options. Ended up having an important year for us. 20 home runs in 424 at-bats, 116 OPS plus, put up a WAR of close to 2 for us. Unlikely that he'll be back next year, but was a very important player for us this year, in part because Junior Marin just really fell out of favor and had a rough year. 10 homers and 367 at-bats, hit just 240. The 28-year-old, I guess the only positive thing is his arbitration number is not going to be growing as fast, but this is a guy who had hit 30, 27, 28, and 31 home runs his first 4 years with us, and really just fell off the map this year. So having Brennan Davis in to eventually kind of become a more regular starter for us at right field over Marin was positive. Juan Palomar, we talked about when we added him to the lineup added him to the roster for the playoffs. 292 batting average, 332 at-bats. Ricardo Cabrera hit just 236 for us. His roster spot could actually be in jeopardy next year. Arbitration number of $2.4 million, not horrible. Do like his defensive versatility, but with all of those young middle infielders we have coming up potentially at the same time, no guarantee that Cabrera is going to be back. We talked about Lopez. He will not be back. He was fine. 234 batting average, solid defensive shortstop, but with the youngsters ready. The fans will not be happy that we let a fan favorite go, but just don't see a need to be paying him $5.5 million next year when we've got so many young, talented shortstops coming up through the system who are probably potentially better than Nicky Lopez at defense and pretty close, and in some cases better than him offensively. So I think we'll be moving on from him, his second stint with the team. Willie Flores, one of the guys who is pushing Lopez out the door, can see has a real nice profile defensively as an infielder. The 60 range, he's not an optimal shortstop, would be a great third baseman, an excellent second baseman, an incredible first baseman, and he can play shortstop on an everyday basis. Would love it if it was 65 or 70 range instead, but he can play there every day for us. Also incredibly talented if we ever wanted to play him in the outfield, but he's so valuable as an infielder. Have a hard time believing he'll get much playing time in right field or other outfield positions down the line. Still has some work to do to grow as a hitter, but did hit 319 in AAA and 316 in the majors, so probably will let him learn on the job next year and hopefully round out his contact, gap power, eye, and avoid strikeout ratings at the major league level. He's only 22 years old, so definitely opportunity for him to continue to improve. Nazir Muley, useful fifth outfielder, hit 257 in 183 at-bats, can play center field for us in a pinch. Don't know whether he'll be back with the team next year. I think he may be out of options. He actually was out of options this year. We did sneak him through waivers once or twice, but don't know whether he'll be back next year, but is a relatively cost-effective option if we do decide to bring him back as a fifth outfielder. And then Tim Anderson was okay, hit 268 and 71 at-bats after we picked him up to play second base. Veteran, good presence, unlikely we'll have him back. He's headed to free agency also. I have a feeling he's still looking for actually not incredibly high money, $6.8 million. So he's getting kind of realistic at the age of 39 about where he is and what he offers, and he's wrecked physically. But again, with all of those young middle infielders we have coming up, Tim Anderson, unlikely to be back. Nicky Lopez, unlikely to be back. And it's possible that Ricardo Cabrera won't even be back because we talked about Flores, but it's not just Flores, keep in mind. It's also Tony Fonseca, Arrighetto Lazioli, and Rich Alvarado, who are on the cusp of being able to contribute at the major league level, and the reason we're kind of comfortable moving on from some of those veteran infielders this offseason. And one final player to mention who didn't make the playoff roster, Sal Stewart, who we picked up in a trade with the Yankees a little less than a year ago, was really disappointing. A .177 batting average and close to 200 at-bats, only 3 home runs. Thought that he was potentially going to be a pretty important utility infielder for us. You can see he can play first well. You can play him at second or third. You can play him at a corner outfield spot if you need to. Not great defensively, but thought that his bat would at least be respectable coming off a year when he hit 238 with 16 homers in 387 at-bats for the Yankees and was league average OPS plus and WRC plus, but was just a total disaster this year. Does still have an option year left for next offseason. He's not pleased with the situation, wants to be in the majors. So he still could be part of the organization, is an angry AAA player next year in some organizational depth, but one player that just really did not work out as we had hoped this 2032 season. And now we'll turn to the Royals pitching staff, which was once again a strength. Already talked about Caleb Lagerwell before the playoff appearance, but just Mr. Consistency. You can see he's now pitched 33 starts for us 6 straight years. His first year with us, he only pitched 31 and then had 32 starts in his first full year in the majors with the Marlins. Just Mr. Consistency over the course of his career. 113 ERA plus, 92 FIP minus. Just goes out and starts 33 games every year, puts up an ERA in the mid to high threes every year. I have to think he's going to opt out of that contract for $18 million next year. Obviously, if he comes back at $18 million, we would love it. If he does opt out, though, we'll think about trying to fit him in. He would be our number one priority to bring him back. But we did sign Venasco and Borgman to extensions last offseason when they were going to be headed into free agency to at least give us a fallback if we can't get an agreement with Lagerwell. If he's looking for too much money, just won't sign with us, or we decide we want to move on and use that money somewhere else, because certainly there's an argument to be made that we need to be investing more in our offense than we do in our pitching staff. So I'm going to have some tough decisions to potentially make with Lagerwell this offseason, but would love to bring him back if possible. Ben Borgman, we also talked about before the playoffs start, 15-6 record, 2.97 ERA. He's been really good since we brought him over from Colorado. Zach Jacobs, 11-8, 3.75 ERA. Talked about him before the Game 3 loss against the White Sox. Nice solid year from him. Gordon Graceffo, 11-13 record, did tie for the league lead in games started. 4.88 ERA, definitely not optimal. Did still put up a 2.9 WAR and had a 3.65 SIERA. So may have gotten a little bit unlucky. Profiles is an above average pitcher, even though he's been below average for us the last 3 years. Going to be making $10 million next year, and then we have a team option for him the year after at age 34. I think if he continues to pitch the way that he's pitching, if we're able to lock up Lagerwell for the long term, Graceffo's option next offseason is probably one we would move on from at that number, but he's a competent major league starter. Happy to kind of have him as a 4th or 5th starter, although the price is certainly not cheap. And then Ricky Venasco, our 5th starter, 8-8 record, 3.65 ERA. Also paying him a little more than we wanted to. Had to sign him at $11 million a year for those 4 years, and then a team option at the end for the 5 years, $60 million. We had to give him last offseason. There weren't a ton of great players we thought heading into free agency to be spending money on, and we wanted to make sure that we stabilized our rotation by getting Borgman and Venasco both back. So he was solid for us as a 5th starter, probably overpaying him a little bit, but not a horrible contract. And it's kind of nice to see, all 5 of our starters were the top 5 pitchers for us in WAR, all kind of between 2.5 and 3.5 WAR, and they really all were healthy throughout the season. Kind of amazing to just see 2 starts not from the 5 guys in your starting rotation. So very healthy pitching staff this season. Some of that is, I think, driven by the pitch counts that we do have all of the fragile guys on, but clearly some of it is just a lot of luck. You definitely don't expect in OOTP 23 to see 160-ish starts from your top 5 starters. Easton Tumis, swingman for us, did start 1 game. Pretty solid, 139 strikeouts, 8-3 record, and a 3.75 ERA over 103 1/3 innings pitched. His arbitration numbers only likely to go up about 600,000. He's a good insurance policy. Certainly could be a guy who ends up in the rotation if we do lose Lagerwell. So getting expensive, but likely to be back. Bryce Hubbard, the lefty, 3.74 ERA over 91 1/3 innings pitched. Pretty important lefty out of the bullpen for us. Profiles is a slightly above average major league pitcher. Has been solid for us. He's going to start hitting arbitration, so his salary likely to double, but think that we will likely have him back next year. Jonah Doan, who we traded for from the Mets, unlikely to be back. 4.58 ERA over 37 1/3 innings. Wasn't as good as we had hoped. He was respectable, 4-2 record, struck out 44 in those 37 1/3 innings. His SIERA indicates he was reasonably effective for us, but sure he's going to be looking for pretty big money as he's poised to hit free agency. $4 million a year. So not huge money, but probably not money we're going to pay for a 34-year-old reliever. But as I did talk about, we probably do need to revamp the relief corps and be a little more deliberate with our bullpen this offseason. So he's certainly in the mix, and Gaston will also be in the mix. He was better with us, smaller sample size, but a 2.81 ERA over 16 innings after he joined us. He's wrecked physically. He'll be 31 this offseason, and he's only looking for 1.8 million. He's must be arbitration eligible. Okay, I guess Gaston is a possibility. I honestly don't love the fact that he's wrecked, and his profile is, okay. Wish he had better control. The stuff and the movement are good, and the real good fastball plus curveball and a okay changeup is more than acceptable for a reliever. Over the course of his major league career, he's been a bit below average as a major league pitcher. Was more effective with us than he's been with anybody else. He's certainly in the mix for next year. No guarantees that he will be back, but we'll think about it. Will Goebel, lefty out of the bullpen, definitely should be back next year after another solid year. 3.77 ERA over 98 innings pitched for us. He's a free agent, though, so he's another guy who would like to start. So we may not have Goebel back, unfortunately. I thought we still had one arbitration year left with him, but apparently I was mistaken. He's looking for $6 million a year, which is a little rich, I think. Mackenzie Gore, we talked about a disappointing year from him, 5.92 ERA, but a very small sample size. He just ended up kind of being the odd man out of Byron Nichols' bullpen. Have a decision to make on his $2 million option for next year. And then Tyler Bosma, the closer. Obviously try not to let the fact that he couldn't preserve the tie game in the ninth inning of the deciding game in the playoffs affect our thoughts on him too much. Also headed into free agency, only looking for $3.6 million, so he's someone to consider. I don't know that we want him back as closer, but you can see he's started for us frequently in the past too. So he could be another interesting guy to, potentially take a starting role if we do have to move on from Lagerwell, or if we do have some more injuries to the starting rotation next year, which by definition absolutely will happen. So, Tumis, Bosma, Goebel, and I guess Mackenzie Gore, all in the mix is potential fifth starters for us next year, depending on how things materialize with the rotation and the pitching staff. The one other guy to look at who was not on the playoff roster, R.J. Dabovich, who we already talked about a little bit ahead of the playoffs. Started the year on the IL. Did end up coming back and put up a rough for him 3.80 ERA over 45 innings when he was pitching at the major league level. Now out with that elbow strain. You can see over the course of his major league career has been a really effective reliever for us. 3-time All-Star, 2-time World Champion. This is really kind of the worst season of his career with that 3.80 ERA. I guess he did have a 4.31 ERA when we first called him up as a 25-year-old, but bit of a disappointing year. Wish we had him for the playoffs. Still signed for another 2 years at $6 million a year. Would think that if he is healthy and able to fully participate in spring training, he could be in the mix for our closer role with Bosma and potentially others next year also. So going to have a lot of decisions to make this coming off season. Feel that our pitching has been a strength and want it to remain a strength. But again, when I look at the stats and what the numbers tell us, 10th in the league in runs scored, 3rd in the league in runs allowed. There's an argument that if Caleb Lagerwell opts out of the contract, to let him move on as a free agent and kind of use that money to invest in our offense. So that's definitely something to think about. We will, fortunately, be getting Dylan Cruz back, who took up a pretty big chunk of our salary this year, making $24.2 million, and the Red Sox only retaining 5% of it. Hopefully, he returns from that torn PCL. Hopefully, he's still a normal injury proneness, although at 30 years old, missing a whole year, it's possible that he'll come back as fragile. But hopefully, his batting ratings will still kind of show him as a plus offensive player, and we can kind of see the type of production, somewhere between the brilliant year he put up in 2031 with the Red Sox and the solid year he put up in 2030 with the Red Sox. If he's able to produce kind of, a 30 home run, 100 ribby, 280 batting average with like a 140 OPS plus, we would certainly be very satisfied with that next year, even though at $24 million, that's the type of production that we're paying from him. But will be good to have him back because certainly going to be impossible for us to re-sign Jacob Guerrero. So hopefully Cruz will be back and healthy and able to fill that role for us. So when I kind of think about improving the offense, looking at the lineup, we're happy with Witt Jr. at third. We're happy with Alex Vasquez at first. We're happy, maybe not happy, but content with Angelo Bolden at catcher. We're happy with Angelo Velasquez at center field. We're happy with Cruz in left or right. I think that we're going to be happy at second and shortstop with some combination of Cabrera, Flores, Lazioli, Rich Alvarado, Tony Fonseca. So in terms of improving the offense, it's if we want to bring in a big-time catcher better than Bolden, but we're going to have to be spending $15 to $20 million a year, and I'm not even sure who's headed to free agency. So then I think it might be upgrading the other corner outfield spot, assuming that Junior Marin is going to be better as a fourth outfielder, and assuming that we're not going to be able to bring Brennan Davis back. $7.5 million is kind of a lot for a fourth outfielder. If we invest in the offense rather than Lagerwell, I think it's looking for a corner outfielder. So let's just take a look at potential free agents and see who's going to be potentially out there among outfielders. Jacob Guerrero, our guy's the best one out there. And then after that, at least by the star ratings, nothing all of that exciting. Jay Allen looks like a respectable bat, but he's looking for $16.5 million. Honestly, bringing Brennan Davis back at $7.5 million wouldn't be the worst thing in the world from a financial perspective. Feel that if we've got Velasquez in center, Cruz in left, and then we can potentially platoon with Brennan Davis and Junior Marin in right. They'll probably also get some time at DH. That's okay. But we're not really making ourselves much better. But, clearly we don't have the money to be signing Jacob Guerrero for $27.6 million a year. So we need more offense. I guess my hope right now is that maybe all of the youngsters we're going to be bringing up will provide a little bit of offense out of second base and shortstop that we haven't been getting the past few years. And maybe that's the way to upgrade the offense because I think Caleb Lagerwell, if he does hit free agency, is going to be the best thing we could bring back. You look Justin Brule coming off a torn rotator cuff. Travis Garnett, he's got great stuff, just doesn't know where it's going. He's been a solid pitcher thus far, 29 years old. He's going to be looking for big money. Jorge Rodriguez, don't love the guys with, only one really good pitch, although his changeup is brilliant. His movement and control, so. I guess my hope is that Lagerwell doesn't opt out of the contract, but you look at the guys hitting the market and expecting $17, $18, $22 million. I think if Caleb Lagerwell does decide to become a free agent, he is the he's the best free agent starting pitcher on the market if he decides to go there. So I have a feeling that means he's going to opt out of the $18 million and give us some big decisions that we're going to have to focus on in our next episode. But we will focus on those decisions in our next episode and find out what happens in the playoffs for the teams that are still alive. And then after that, what happens with Caleb Lagerwell in that next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.